Welcome to Virtual VSC. My name is Kristen Mills. I'm the Visual Arts Program Manager at the Vermont Studio Center, and we are hosting a number of amazing events. Tonight we have Abigail DeVille, who I'm extremely excited to talk to and to hear from. Abigail DeVille was born in New York, where she lives and works, maintaining a long-standing interest in marginalized people and places. Abigail creates site-specific immersive installations designed to bring attention to forgotten stories. Abigail often works with objects and materials sourced from the area surrounding the exhibition site, and her theatrical aesthetic embodies the phrase, "One person's trash is another person's treasure." Though collected objects are essential to her installations, Abigail's priority are the stories her installations can tell. Abigail's family roots in New York go back at least 2 generations. Her interest in the city and her work about it is both political and personal. Her work has been exhibited at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Pinchuk Art Museum in Kiev, the New Museum in New York, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and a plethora of others. She has designed sets for a number of theatrical productions, and she's received a number of honors and awards and fellows, such as a Creative Capital grantee. And in 2017, 2018, Abigail was a Chuck Close, Henry and Marion T. Mitchell Rome Prize Fellow. In addition to that, Abigail has been invited to Vermont Studio Center at least 3 or 4 times. She has not been able to make it for every different reason in the world. Right now, it's because of the pandemic, but she is with us virtually. And I do want to say that I've been following Abigail's work since about 2012, when she had a show in Philadelphia at Marginal Utility.
Oh, that's so cool.
With David Dempwolf, yeah. And I was like, who is this person? And then I saw her work at the New Museum, maybe just a year or 2 later, kind of coming down the stairs, and I looked up or looked over and I was like, wait, I know this person. And so I'm super excited to actually hear her voice and talk about her work. So everyone, welcome Abigail DeVille. Hooray, silently, you're all cheering. Thank you, excellent.
I'm finally here.
Finally here.
I made it to Vermont virtually. Yeah, I mean, one day we're gonna make it happen.
Yes.
Thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. I look forward to having a conversation with you all silently through the chat. So I'm gonna try to get through these images fairly quickly. I'm gonna share my screen. So I know that so I'll just start in saying that I guess maybe really for like the last 5 or 6 years, I have been looking at the James Baldwin creative process essay that he wrote in 1962, and really thinking through that, or thinking about the responsibility as an artist, and not just an American artist, but an artist, and what that means, really, like what kind of life is that. And I'm just going to read this portion, which is the closing kind of paragraph of the essay. The dangers of being an American artist are not greater than those of being an artist anywhere else in the world today, but they are very particular. These dangers are produced by our history. They rest on the fact that in order to conquer this continent, the particular aloneness of which I speak, the aloneness in which one discovers that life is tragic and therefore unutterably beautiful, cannot be permitted. And that this prohibition is typical of all emergent nations will be proved, I have no doubt, in many ways during the next 50 years. This continent is now conquered, but our habits and our fears remain. And in the same way that to become a social human being one modifies and suppresses, and ultimately, without great courage, lies to oneself about all one's interior uncharted chaos, so have we as a nation modified or suppressed and lied about all the darker forces in our history. We know in the case of the person that whoever cannot tell himself the truth about his past is trapped in it, is immobilized in the prison of his undiscovered self. This is also true of nations. We know how a person in such a paralysis is unable to assess either his weaknesses or his strengths, and how frequently indeed he mistakes the one for the other. And this I think we do. We're the strongest nation in the Western world, but this is not for the reasons that we think. It is because we have an opportunity that no other nation has in moving beyond the old world concepts of race and class and caste, and to create finally what we must have had in mind when we first began speaking of the New World. But the price of this is a long look backward when we came and an unflinching assessment of the record. For an artist, the record of that journey is most clearly revealed in the personalities of the people the journey produced. Societies never know it, but the war of an artist with his society is a lover's war, and he does at his best what lovers do, which is to reveal the beloved to himself, and with that revelation to make freedom real. So really the last kind of three sentences two sentences. For the artist, the record of that journey is most clearly revealed in the personalities of the people the journey produced. Societies never know it, but the war of an artist with his society is a lover's war, and he does at his best what lovers do, which is to reveal the beloved to himself, and with that revelation to make freedom real. I feel like that definitely is a charge. It's a call to action, and I've made it, my unofficial artist's mission statement in my heart and my mind. It's something that I'm constantly thinking about, and in the different ways that we can reveal hidden truths hidden truths in the everyday to unsuspecting audiences, and the kinds of alternative modes of understanding the world around us. And this is another quote that inspired a project that I currently have up. Was called Light of Freedom. It's at Madison Square Park right now up until January 31st. So let me give you a word of the philosophy of reform. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all-absorbing, and for the time being putting all other tumults to silence. It must do this or it does nothing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Frederick Douglass, August 3rd, 1857. And this is in direct relationship to the Black Lives Matter protest that took hold this year, because they've been ongoing since 2013. But thinking about this collective reckoning, this racial reckoning that feels, it feels different from previous moments in American history. And I think also just a wildly optimistic thing in the midst of all of this darkness, mourning, death, corruption, all kinds, you name it, we're going through it. But thinking about in the midst of all of that, that people would come together in all 50 states for the first time and recognizing the humanity and the suffering of, one of America's original sins of the ongoing struggle for freedom for people of color, and specifically African Americans in this country, or people of the African diaspora, to be more accurate. But this is the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and this source is from the New York Public Library. It lived in Madison Square Park between 1876 and 1882. It was there to generate interest and for fundraising for the pedestal so that it can be brought to the United States. It was a 21-year project from start to finish of the engineering behind it, the guys who wanted to make it happen in France. They collected 600,000 francs from everyday working class French people, contributed this gift to the United States. And as it turns out, Edward Labelliere was a French abolitionist who was the one who had this idea to gift the United States this particular sculpture, which was something that the sculptor of it, Bartoli, was something that he had wanted to make for decades already. But as a gift for the end of slavery in America, for the end of the Civil War, but somehow from its original inception to when it was actually installed in the 1880s, that part of it became less, in the forefront of the conversation of it, and actually, took a back seat to how we understand the sculpture. So this is Lady Liberty in Paris, getting put together, the staging of it before it came over. This is a picture of the torch. I think it's from maybe 1986. This is the original torch that was up for 100 years, that was then replaced in 1986 with something that was more in line with the original sculptor's intent. And yeah, so there was originally a light in here. It was a lighthouse. Those are glass panes that I think originally were wobbly and fell out. There was water damage initially. Oh, so I should say, so then inside the sculpture, there is a bell, a decommissioned school bell from a small town in Illinois. And here are the side-by-side images of the original torch with the replacement one that is currently on the Statue of Liberty. So this was my drawing. This was the idea that I had for this particular sculpture, and trying to respond to a moment or think how, thinking through monuments, or thinking through how I could make something that could talk to all of the things that are happening right now, and the ongoing protest, and what actually makes America great. People have said it time and time again, it's people, but I think it's the people on the margins. It's the people who have been denied this idea of freedom. Those are the ones who have continually pushed for it, right? So this is the sculpture in the park. It's encased in gold scaffold. There's planks that you're encouraged not to climb up, but it's a site that is under construction. You can see maybe the bell that's inside. There's lights on it at night. And it's not too far from where the original sculpture was installed. And I don't remember, but there's maybe about 80 mannequin limbs at the top of the sculpture, which are all arms. And so thinking about the ways in which, the democracy is enacted through individuals and not, as the state. So that's pretty much the reason why they are individualized, and thinking about the collective power of coming together versus the strong arm of Lady Liberty's hand upholding the torch, that it's actually the people that are the fire. And then thinking through blue, blue is the hottest fire that there is. There is this incredible Faith Ringgold painting called We Came to America. And it's, I think, from 1992, where the Statue of Liberty is holding a Black baby, and there are Black people drowning in the water behind her. And at the horizon line, there is a slave ship that is on fire. So I was thinking about all of these things when I thought about the color of the limbs, and what that potentially could mean. This is another project that happened in Portland in 2018, and it was called The American Future. It was a 10,000 square foot warehouse space at the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. So I was there for about a month and researched the history of the neighborhood in which this warehouse is. And it's in the Albina district neighborhood, which historically was redlined, and where Black people in Portland lived, I think, from maybe the 1930s until, the last 10, 15 years, the areas have been heavily, aggressively gentrified. And so Black people have been dispersed all over Portland. But Oregon has a lot of distinctions, as one of them notably is them being the first and only state in the union that wrote in its constitution that Black people were not permitted to move to the state. And they had a 5-year it's called Lash Laws, 5 years to leave Oregon, to leave the state of Oregon if you were Black once the state constitution became ratified, which I think was in the 1850s, which was, pretty late. But so Portland and specifically, but also Oregon has this really strange and dark, racial history there. But so they have they also unfortunately have a number of open-ended police brutality cases where people have never been brought to justice, and this was called a wave wall. So this was in thinking through the kinds of commemorative walls and spaces, and thinking about the children and adults, humans, beings that have been unaccounted for and that had been murdered by the police department. And the Portland Police Department also was started by the KKK. So as you walked into this space, and there were, I think, 13 sculptures. Do you see the wave wall here? Behind that were historic footage, videos, films from the Historical Society, the Oregon Historical Society. I was able to get access to a bunch of community board meetings that happened from the 1960s through the 80s that dealt with a myriad of these issues that I'm just brushing upon. And there was this step pyramid that on the outside was covered with newspapers, which was a local homeless advocacy newspaper that was, sold by them, called Street Roots. And inside you could walk through, which was called a tunnel of ancestors. And there was music playing inside. And then you come out the other side. And then I was calling the step pyramid a conical intersect. There were images that were being projected of the business district that had been bulldozed down to the ground, I think in the 1960s, with the promise of something, or whatever it was. It never happened. It's still, just like an open lawn there, but it was just pretty much, I'm putting it lightly, domestic terrorism, right? Where the neighborhood previous to the 60s, I think in the 30s and earlier, was a European immigrant enclave. And then as it started getting, Blacker, that was when, the nonsense really started happening. So these are some buildings that had been torn down, and then they were being projected onto the side of the pyramid. Also, the business district, I'd say, was about maybe 8 blocks north of where this building is. So the exhibition and the installation was called The American Future because I had taken that quote specifically from a Ken Burns documentary, thinking about Thomas Jefferson and his legacy. And, Thomas Jefferson was the one who in 1804 charted the Expedition West. He was really the main proponent and fighter for westward expansion, and people really wanting to know what mysteries the United States, held past the west of the Mississippi. So, and thinking through the kinds of hypocrisy that is embedded within his legacy is, the press release of the Declaration of Independence. And although he borrowed, language from others, but, he was the chief architect of that. And thinking about, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, but, he was a slaveholder and many other things. So on the other side, there was another wave wall, and this one also had different films that were being screened. And then Street Roots puts out a zine every December. And so here on the back wall were the art submissions for their December zine. And so they were the artists that were included in that were also a part of this exhibition. And they had their opening here at the exhibition. And then this pyramid kind of open pentagon space was also a gathering place and a space for performances and talks and lectures during the run of the exhibition. I think I gotta pick up the pace here, but this was an exhibition that I did in Baltimore at with the Contemporary in 2016. It was at the Peel, I think they call it the Peel Center now, but the building was constructed in 1814. It was the first building built specifically to be a museum in the United States. And the building had been closed to the public since 1997. And, you know, it was built by the Peels family of artists. There's some portraits that were borrowed from the Maryland Historical Society, the walls here. And then this is them excavating a mastodon, which I think was happened sometime in the 19th century. I'm not quite sure when, in New York State, but which was like a huge deal in that moment. But and so I did 13 installations inside the house. I think it's 4 stories. I took over 2 floors and then used the opportunity of each space to talk about a moment of history that building had participated in or had been a silent witness to. It was the first city hall. So this room in particular was called Charm City Roundhouse. Then, you know, in the War of 1812, the flag that flew over Fort McHenry was the inspiration for the Star Spangled Banner, and that flag itself was about 30 by 40 feet, she was a woman made it. I think her name is Mary Pickford. I'm not 100% sure, but she was commissioned and got paid, I think $600 or $700 by the United States government to make that flag. And then as it turns out, and there's a museum in Baltimore where you can go and see her house. The flag was made on the floor of a brewery, and Black women workers were the ones that helped make the flag. This is upstairs. This was another space. I called it the People's Theater, and it was a space for reflection through the installation. And there were some signs that had been used in the Baltimore uprising the year before. So this exhibition opened within days of the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Freddie Gray. And so I was very conscious of thinking about reclaiming and recontextualizing a longer timeline of protest history in Baltimore versus the kind of 30-second snippets that, you know, the corporate media puts out there, and how they frame, you know, Blackness or people actually, you know, fighting for their freedom. Here in this room was talking about the legacy of redlining in Baltimore. And a lot of all of the materials were taken from this not-for-profit organization called the Loading Dock, and they lent us all of these materials and took them back after the exhibition. So they were super generous. This was a larger room that was thinking through the protest history. And then this sculpture in particular is a 30-foot dry cleaning rack that makes a ton of noise. And it was thinking about the processions of bodies and the ways that people have continued to protest, you know, from day one, you know, on this continent. That's Joyce Scott singing at the closing of the exhibition. And there was a marching band, the New Edition Legacy Marching Band that's based in Baltimore, where their only rule is that you have to be potty trained. And they came and processed right in front of City Hall for the closing event of the exhibition. Oh, I think, okay, so this image is the last image for the Baltimore exhibition, but it was to commemorate Colored Grammar School number 3, which was a school for newly emancipated Black children. In this building, there were 600 children in the building, I think from the 1870s to about the 1890s, with 8 teachers. So there were 600 pieces of slate in the room, and I was thinking about the legacy of really of education in the ways that we have, in ways that we've forgotten about. And then lastly, I'm just going to briefly go through these images, which was a procession that I did in Washington, D.C. in Anacostia in 2014 for the 5x5 project. And we processed from Frederick Douglass's house to a set of 3 storefronts where I made installations in the storefronts based on Jacob Lawrence's migration series with materials that I collected from a 10-day trip down south from DC to Jacksonville, Florida. And then this was another procession a month following from Marcus Garvey Park into the back of the Studio Museum in Harlem. Yep, I'm done.
Okay, what I didn't say at the beginning was that Abigail was going to do a quick kind of run through of her work so that we could open it up for a conversation. Is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so what I would like to do is to invite the audience to throw questions or comments into the chat. Just because I can't see everyone on one screen, it'll be easier to do it that way. And I will read things aloud to Abigail, who will answer them, or we'll get something back and forth. And if we do need to unmute people, we can make that happen as well. But this might be the best way to start. So with that, I just want, just go ahead and pour in those questions. And I have one.
Mhm.
I'm not chatting it. I'm going to ask you. I'm interested a little bit in, it seems like obviously your work takes a ton of research and connecting with people in whatever city you're kind of wherever you're showing and what city maybe you're portraying. Maybe it's easier in New York because maybe you have more connections there, but you mentioned something about borrowing work for exhibitions, like from a historical society. Is that like a huge part of what you do? Is that tricky, or is that just in that one example, you were borrowing some portraits?
I think that's like maybe a one-off situation because I don't think I've done that again. I can't think of something where I've done that again. And that just happens to be the people that I was collaborating with in that moment. They were outstanding. You know, lots of times organizations, you know, say that they have connections to the community, and then you ask them for community connections and they route you to developers, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that place, it was true. They really did have relationships with lots of community, like lots of different kinds of people all throughout the city of Baltimore. And they also provided a lot of services, so which it's kind of sad. Like they shuttered the organization, I think maybe in 2017 or something, and it hasn't resumed you know, programming.
Oh,
But yeah, that was Baltimore specific.
yeah. I was just going to say that it's fascinating how, from what I know of your work, what I've seen, what I've read, is, you know, that you collect a lot of the trash or garbage or things that you can find, and then so I thought it was kind of an interesting like mashup of two things, you know.
Mhm.
So I have a question for you in the chat. I'll read it to you. Do you usually go to an exhibition with an idea in mind, or do you start your research when you get someplace like Baltimore or Portland? How much happens once you arrive there?
I'd say maybe 90% happens when I get there, but there were in the Portland and Baltimore examples, I had previous site visits. And so I had, you know, I'd gone, I'd poked around, I went to different institutions, I went to bookstores while I was there. I was starting conversations with people that I needed to talk to, or, you know, whoever was help facilitating the project, people that they thought I needed to meet while I was in town. And so the ball started rolling then. And the Portland project was probably the longest time I had to, you know, digest information and really think about something. I'd went out maybe a whole year, maybe even a year and a half before the project actually happened. So there was enough time to think through, why does something need to exist? And Most of the time, I don't know where to start unless I have enough information, feel like I'm armed with enough information. I can't see it. Like I can't see what it is. And I just need the info for it to like spring forth.
Mhm. What was the hardest show that you've done or that you've put together? I mean, it seems like they're all kind of hard. So, what was one that was like, had some things in there that you didn't expect or?
Maybe the hardest one ever was the first public art project in DC,
Mhm.
because that was strange. It was the DC Commission. They picked mostly outside curators who did not live in Washington DC or had a relationship with it. So that already immediately pisses locals off. And then, like thinking about the ways in which art can provoke or be provocative and not necessarily facilitating dialogue with the communities in which these works were going into. And then I chose Anacostia, which still is a neighborhood where people are very present, very much a part of what's going on. And so, I didn't understand the politics of that particular space. And then whenever I asked questions, that was the one that where people kept routing me to different developers or other people that folded back into like a bureaucratic, stuff instead of actual like community members. So I was just like talking to dudes in the street, talking to old man in the street who was, trying to get my number. And I would just wanted him to take me to church. I'm like, just take me to church. Like, I just want to meet people. Please, like help me. I lived there for a month and I made very little connections. And it also showed me, I had the mindset of New York minute nonsense, where I didn't realize actually how much time I really would have needed to make the project I really wanted to make. I was introduced to one woman, this older woman, I don't remember her name at the moment, but she was so generous. And her grandfather was an emancipated slave who came and settled in Anacostia and built his home there. And she lived down the street from his original home. She still lived in the neighborhood. She shared the story of her grandparents with me. She let me photograph, her photos of them. She let me, audio record our interview, and so like I had all of these thoughts of like, primary research and grandeur that was not happening in 1 month. And, especially without the support that I needed to get it done. So I think I was like wildly naive in that moment. And it was a good learning thing. I think that was probably the most difficult, just like painful.
Yeah.
Like growing painful, frustrating thing that I've done. And then the community hated it and it got like taken down a month early. So it was a good time all around.
Oh my God. I hope I didn't trigger something.
No, you didn't, but that's definitely the
Yeah.
hardest lesson I've learned.
Well, it's a good lesson. We have a couple of questions now. Can you speak more about the processions and how you
Mhm.
collaborate to integrate them into your process?
So the processions are usually led by community people. So I'll say the first one in DC, I collaborate a lot with a theatrical director named Charlotte Bradford. We've worked on a lot of different things together. And I invited her to come down, and she's just a natural organizer, and we met a whole bunch of local artists in the DC area, and performance artists and musicians. We went to drum circles and parks. Like we met a whole bunch of people who were down to participate. Some people, I don't remember the family's name, but they had sons that were really proficient drummers and they participated. So, and then also the Burnt Sugar Orchestra came down from New York and also processed with us. So it's a lot of times it's been Charlotte as like the ringleader, ringmaster of bringing different peoples together, but it's usually reflective of the local arts community and people local people participating in the processions.
That makes sense. I want to meet the Charlotte. How much do you imagine ahead of starting work versus finding out through making of your work?
I think, you know, I've made this elaborate process, but I think it's not rigid, you know. I think, you know, the history and information is permeable, and, you know, that's the kind of seed that's germinating. And I might have an idea of what a form is, but I don't have it, you know, like nailed down to, you know, exactly what moves I'm going to make until I'm in the throes of making. And so years ago, maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago at this point, I just used to, you know, like in undergrad, you're just like an explosive force. You're exploding, your explosions all over the place without harnessing kind of energy. I'm thinking about Storm from X-Men right now. But, you know, and so then I've set up like roadblocks for instead of like having that kind of unharnessed, you know, energy, I need to answer a series of questions for myself, and then thinking through the information, then how these forms will communicate to the viewer bodily, and you know, how I can reframe material for them to have a different kind of understanding about themselves and the spaces that they occupy.
I like that answer. You spoke about sound in the Baltimore exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about how sound informs your work?
You know what, the sounds that I have used in different exhibitions have also been another collaboration with Justin Hicks. He was in one of the images that I showed in the Baltimore images, but he was singing with his wife, Kenita, and they have this beautiful group called the Hot Plates. I recommend everybody look them up. HAWT plates. I mean, they are spectacular, and they have a group, a family group that sing together. They make work together, and it's really rooted in history and bringing, you know, kind of voices to the past and the present. And they're like beautiful image makers just with their voices. It's incredible. But so in researching the Baltimore specific project, we found um, the textbooks that the students were learning from. There was a book in the Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore that had the curriculum and listed the textbooks that the kids were learning from. And so through that, we were able to get a songbook, and there was a digitized PDF of the songbook that these students sung from. And so he and his wife picked out a few songs, and they sung them live in the exhibition. But then there were some songs that they recorded that also played within the exhibition. And so I'm always thinking about that, kind of the ways in which storytelling happens through sound and through music, and the way that it makes you feel, because I feel like sound is something that can immediately punch you in the gut or sneaks up on you when you're not expecting it. And so in the Tunnel of Ancestors in the Portland project, the Silver Tunnel was a recording that Justin had made for the Baltimore project. It was called a song called Home Sweet Home. And what was funny about that was there was a dueling sound piece in another space in the Portland exhibition. There was a pink box. I don't know if I should go back to the slide show, but there was a room that I was calling the living room. And in that, there were 200 years of American music by Lawrence Welk playing on repeat on vinyl. So they were kind of in competition with one another, which was interesting.
Do you ever find yourself becoming attached to the objects you work with? And is it difficult to release them as they become part of the work?
No, I'm only committed to keeping my grandmother's trash. I don't want other people's stuff, you know. I feel like it's time based, almost like a performance of me responding to these different variables and then making something in a particular time and place, and you can only, you can only experience it that one time. These installations don't travel. So it is about that place and for those people. And sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes I do keep things that are too, too strange to let go. Like the Portland exhibition, I kept poker playing, leather daddy, cigar smoking stuffed animal. And then there was another stuffed animal that was a flea. I mean, there was just like weird stuffed animals that I'd never seen before that I definitely kept. But that's like the extent of it. If it's something a little off, I'll keep it. But most of the time it just goes back to the waste stream.
That's awesome. Somebody said, please speak about your work now during the pandemic, and thank you.
What do you mean? What about it in the pandemic? How has it been working? Or
let's see if they respond to that. They didn't give any more directive other than that.
Well, I'll say I have definitely been thankful for opportunities to show and make something that could respond to the moment, because I think it's much harder just sitting around and trying to feel inspired right now, right? Like not much to be inspired by, and the continual having to be stationary or indoors and everything else, is but there's so much to respond to, right? Like there's a continual cycle of, stuff to respond to. So I think for me, the Light of Freedom project was a total gift, and thinking how could I respond to the moment? Because before that, I really was not making much of anything. To be honest, I think I've found it difficult, like a lot of people, to, make work right now. But we're these porous vessels, right? Where all of these influences come through, and then we eke them out, and then somehow, harness energy to making something that could respond. So I think it's difficult. I can't say more than that, but yeah, I can't say any more.
That's a hard question. Do you rely on stipends or commissions to gather materials for installations, as well as finding free stuff? And are you a fan of Mark Bradford? I see a lot of parallels in y'all's work regarding upcycling cultural materials.
Yeah, I love Mark Bradford's work, yes. And I love free. I don't care. I don't care if I have a budget. I'm always looking for free, or I'm getting open at the Goodwill bins, or going to, junkyards, or yeah, I like free. Free is always number one. There was an installation I did at the ICA LA in 2017, and I ended up being there for a month, but we drove around LA for 2 weeks in a moving truck looking for stuff off of, free Craigslist, and and just like trash. I mean, we drove around the entire city. But yeah, I like the journey, the scavenge to look for things.
Okay, so this is the opposite of my first question. Which is your favorite body of work? Or maybe it's the same answer. I don't know, actually.
I don't have a favorite. I can't. I don't know if any of you ever experienced this. You must experience this as artists, right? Where you make something and I guess it took so much out of you, then you're immediately depressed. And then it's hard to like go back and be objective about looking at that thing. And then it might actually take a really long time for you to even understand the thing that you made. And so I don't ever have a favorite, because I'm always like, not kind of running away from the thing that I made, but I don't want to get attached. I'm always thinking that, the better thing is right around the corner, I keep doing this thing where I'm like taking a fake magnifying glass, but I'm always looking for the better thing. Like I know, I can do better, you know, or this could be better, or this can be better. So I think it's a constant, you know, tug of war that you're in with yourself. And so I don't ever like, I do know, I do have friends who are just like, look at what I made. This is so beautiful. You know, I'm like, I'm not one of those people. I've never been one of those people. I'm like, huh? But I mean, you know, more power to you. You know, yes, embrace, love.
Okay, here's another one. I imagine making art like this makes people uncomfortable. Do you have any stories, encouraging or otherwise, of society's response to work you've exhibited and how those dialogues have been impactful or significant to you as an artist?
Um, I mean, I'm just gonna dredge up the DC project again. Well, Marion Barry, before he died, rest in peace, had my project declared a fire hazard, even though none of these buildings were able to occupy them. You weren't permitted to go in. They were just storefronts, but it was a way to get them out of there. And really what the heart of the issue was the politics behind the space, which I think I had mentioned before, that Anacostia has historic preservation status. The government has been waiting for properties in that neighborhood. They've been quietly buying up properties in that neighborhood and then letting them completely fall apart. And so there's dilapidated properties in the neighborhood that people who live there can't get access to, and they want access to them. So they want to know, as me as an outsider, how come I had access to that space? And so it kind of didn't matter what the art looked like. There was a whole under conversation that I was not aware of when I entered into that space. And so it ended up being a series of conversations, multiple things that were written about it. There was a public art NPR hour about the responsibility of public art and conversation with community, which I think was actually really positive, right? Like, all these people were talking about how they didn't have access to this space, and they're, you know, banging on doors and nobody's giving them access. And then here was the perfect opportunity with this, you know, art project, this failed art project, to talk about all of these things that these people were being denied access to within their own community. So I think, you know, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think, yeah, I don't even remember what the question was now. What was the question? Tell me the question again.
I think you started to hit on it. Like, any stories, encouraging or otherwise, of society's response?
I think, you know, even though it was, you know, I think that's an encouraging story, because, you know, it brought something to light that was, you know, being ignored, you know, and so potentially, you know, if those people were heard, I don't know what happened with that, you know, outside of that particular moment, but I feel like that was a powerful response, right? That people who were being ignored then had the moment to make as much noise and to yell at as many people who were deserving of it for 2 months, you know, that was really, you know, got a lot of attention for 2 months.
That answered it, I think. Okay, this person says, thank you for sharing your work. Charm City Roundhouse in particular got me thinking about the roles of museums and history centers, etc. Historically, they've defined and upheld traditional power structures. Despite this colonial and often white supremacist past, do you think that museums can be agents for positive change in today's society? Or does society need to change museums?
The problem with the museums, oh, this is re-recorded. I mean, the thing with museums is, in this country, well, you know what? I don't know. I'm just, in my head, I'm just like, well, would it be better if the government actually gave money towards these things? Probably not, right? Because we've seen what public restrooms look like in airports, right? Like, you know, like you fly into any other country, and, you know, there isn't like a 5-inch gap from either side of, the door, right? Anyway, that's totally off topic, but I'm just thinking about, like how in Europe that they get governmental support, that the government sponsors culture, where they feel that, the culture isn't just about making a buck, that there is actually a thing called culture that should be preserved and should be supported. But, and so then, how everything is privatized here, and then there's people who are on the board that, institutions that need their money, and they're kind of shaping and, maybe passively, quietly, are the ones that are donating the works that end up in the collections and everything else like that. So I think it's a big kind of maybe more money question than it is about like the reframing of white supremacy, because I think if maybe education was better, right? Like if visual literacy was taught, or there was more conversations about critical thinking through works, right? I think maybe, I think there is a space for more discursive kinds of conversations around the framing of the work, maybe as it is in galleries. And I think that people have actively been trying to do that go back and insert people in 20th century art history that were purposely excluded. I know I'm just thinking right now of Kelly Jones and Now Dig This and all the other exhibitions that have happened since then. But like people going back and doing the work and inserting people who were excluded from whole histories. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's maybe like a more of an education. Like I feel like probably the cheapest route to do that is reframe the way we think about looking or seeing or conversation that could happen on an earlier level, like maybe, like second grade, third grade, elementary school, understandings of how material works, how space works, what do all these different things mean, that could maybe make a kind of larger systematic change eventually, versus like thinking about dismantling. Because if we start dismantling the white supremacy within museums, institutions, we're not going to have any museums. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know where to start with that. It seems like such a daunting task. I just think maybe if we can change the way we see. I don't know.
I'm going to speak for the whole group and say that was a great answer. Here's another one. You ask yourself a series of questions. Why does this need to exist? And another, how are these forms communication? Can you share more of these kinds of questions?
Sure. Yeah. Why does this need to exist? Why would anybody care about this? Why, like, why do I think this is important? Or I think, what, I'll just use the Light of Freedom piece as an example, like thinking through, oh, okay, it's a torch. We all know what the torch is. We know what the Statue of Liberty is. But how can I construct a different kind of conversation so that it's not just the immediate read of, oh yeah, Statue of Liberty, torch. Okay, great, got it. And then inserting the scaffold, around that, and then thinking about the ways in which labor is valorized and in just the decision of making it gold, and then thinking about, oh, then it's like more material questions that start to present themselves. So then what does it mean if I make the patina, the torch, a rust kind of color? And that's me making just a connection about ancient kind of ideas, the ancient idea of what rule by the people could potentially look like. And then in the ways in which that has been co-opted or corrupted, falling back into the scaffolding. But yeah, I think, yeah, first of all, not who, what, when, where, and why, but, not too far away from really simple questions like that. And then being more interrogative in terms of the information that I do have, and then how it's unfolding and revealing itself to me, and then asking myself questions as to why does this material need to be this particular way, or why does it need to be this size, or what does it mean if it's in this, this spatial relationship between the viewer and it, potentially what do all of those things communicate?
Well, I'm going back. There was a question earlier I jumped over. This was kind of about in the beginning, somebody asking about going to the city and getting to know the place before you really start to make the work. Have you ever done the reverse, where you held the idea and saw the exhibition, but needed to find the place for it?
No, but that's what the Bartoli, the Statue of Liberty dude did. He originally proposed a lady figure for the Suez Canal in Cairo, maybe 30 years before the Statue of Liberty. And it was a woman, it was an Egyptian woman holding a light. And so then that somehow that got, remixed into Libertas and, it being for New York Harbor. But he was really bent on making that sculpture happen. And so I think I haven't had that experience yet where there is something that I just burning desire to make this thing.
Mhm.
Mostly, I don't know what I'm doing. I know how I try to stay open. Yeah, I try to stay open. Stay open. I don't have any preconceived ideas about what I'm doing. I work really intuitively, and I feel after I feel comfortable enough that I have armed myself with enough reasons to make work, then it happens.
Somebody asked, and this might be, I don't know how you want to perceive this question. What gives you hope these days?
It's a really basic, I guess people give me hope. I think, people pulled through. They voted for Biden, the protests that happened this summer and that have been continuing to happen. I think I'm really optimistic because, people are not going to let the whole thing go down in flames without a fight, right? Like, okay, we make some really bad decisions and, we get bored really easily. And I'm out here protesting today, but I might be gone, in 6 months. I might not be interested in this anymore, but I'm hopeful and thankful that all of it happened this year. As crazy and as dark as this year has been, there have been people consistently trying to push back the darkness. And I feel like that's what's giving me hope right now.
Yeah, that just gave me chills, actually. Your answer did. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to say if anyone has any last questions, it's now or next time. Someone just said, push back the darkness. Thank you. Yes. All right. Well, this is not the same as being in person.
No.
You have no idea how excited we are to have you in person. And you might be excited to come to Vermont as well.
Oh yeah, I am very excited. I somehow have never been to Vermont, so I'm saving it all for you guys.
Yeah, that's great. We'll show you the whole state. I'll just drive you around to every single county. But thank you so much, Abigail. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your work with us, and for the insight, and all your accomplishments are incredible. And I'm going to keep following your work, and I hope these people will also continue on following your work. And yeah, I don't know what to say except thank you. Those were really amazing answers. It was great to see your work and hear you talk about it. So
thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions.
yay.
Hey.